Hey everyone, it's Anime Reaper coming at you with another What If Naruto Found Uzuamki Library Part 5. This fanfiction was written by S. Targon. If you like this what if and want more like it, please like and subscribe to my channel and don't forget to check the description and leave a comment down below. Without further ado, let's get started. Chapter 5, Difficult Preparations. Chapter 5. Hinata was still a little shaky when she arrived at the Hyuga compound. Kurane-sensei suggested that they should forego their normal evening training and make sure they got a full night's sleep. Depending on their assignment, they may have to set out immediately. Though she understood the reasons, Hinata was disappointed that she and Naruto wouldn't get to eat the dinner she'd packed that morning. She thought the shiitake udon had come out rather well, and she wanted to see Naruto's face when he tasted it. Perhaps she could pack some for their journey to the border. Though she'd come home earlier than usual, the main house was still quiet. Her father must be occupied with the village council again. She felt herself relax for a moment before she realized what she was doing and chided herself for her disrespect. He was still her father, and it was unseemly for her to be glad at his absence. Worse, he would probably detect her disloyal feelings when he returned, and it would be his duty to punish her for failing to show proper respect. Hinata, her father's voice interrupted her thoughts, and she hated herself for the way she jumped. Her fear was unworthy of a Hyuga. "Yes, father," she replied in a quiet, but precise voice. If she could take down an enemy spy, surely she could talk to her own father. "You will follow me to the training room," he said, walking down the hallway without another word. Hinata followed, her bare feet silent on the polished wood. When she reached the dojo, father was waiting for her, along with her cousin and younger sister. Niji was as impassive as ever, though she wondered if his eyes smoldered with resentment when no one else could see. Hanabi was openly glowering, the expression on her face at odds with the graceful features she'd inherited from their mother. Hinata's own face seemed to be a mixture of her father and mother, in varying amounts. There was a touch of the clan leader in the line of her brows, and the angle of her jaw, the latter of course rarely visible given the way she tended to duck her head around others. Hanabi, on the other hand, was the very image of their mother, a woman the younger girl had never known. Hinata remembered that beloved face though, and savored the memories of the kind-hearted woman who'd treasured her only daughter. Of course, that made it difficult to fight with Hanabi. One look at those eyes, no matter how angry they seemed, always softened her hands. Her heartache and longing for the only person who seemed to understand her, to treasure her, had no place in the sparring ring. Nevertheless, they intruded constantly, sapping her will to fight. No matter how disappointed her father became with her, Hinata couldn't force herself to hate her sister, to strike her down as he demanded during their sparring matches. So it was inevitable that Hanabi would triumph against her larger, but mostly passive, sister. Father had first been amazed at Hanabi's prowess, and it lifted Hinata's heart a little to see her sister smile as she basked under father's praise. But eventually his surprise turned to disappointment in his oldest daughter, who could not hold her own against a girl several years her junior. Hanabi continued to work hard, thriving under father's amazed tutelage, while Hinata was always more and more of a disappointment. Today was no different from any other, though perhaps Hanabi's expression was a little more fierce than usual. Hinata briefly wondered about this, before her father's voice derailed her train of thought. "I am to understand," he said in a low voice, "if certain members of Umbu are to be believed, that you played a role in the capture of a spy today." Hinata's heart contracted into a hard lump at the patina of frost that overlaid her father's words. She'd thought about telling him herself when she saw him, hoping he would be proud of her. But he'd already heard about it, and did not seem happy at the news. "Hi," she said in a faltering voice. "I am told," he continued, emphasizing the last word, "that you utilized an advanced technique to disable your opponent." "No, my teammates also," she began. "I do not care about them," her father snapped. "And you will not speak of that low-born trash again. It is your behavior that reflects on our clan, not theirs. Hanabi, assume a guard position." Hanabi made a half-turn, moving smoothly into a basic Jyukin defensive stance. Her eyes bored into Hinata's and Hinata knew her sister did not like the news she had heard. "Hinata, you will now demonstrate this technique of yours," her father commanded. Hinata stared at her sister and swallowed. She remembered the state of mind she'd been in, the determination to stop her foe or die trying, the determination to not let her team down, the determination to show Naruto what she could do. She felt none of that now, in front of the cold eyes of her family, quailing before the rage and something else burning in her sister's eyes. Was it fear? Hinata did not want to hurt her, even for father. Ota-san, as I suspected, he said coolly, your role in this was exaggerated, possibly in a misguided attempt to curry favor with the clan. I knew you were weak, Hinata, but to find that you lack honor as well? This is very disappointing. Gomen, Ota-san, but I did not know you were told of. Hinata's voice trailed off. She didn't want to lie, but she also didn't want to have to attack her sister's Tenketsu points. Hinata wasn't even sure she could do it now if she wanted to. That moment in the street, she'd briefly possessed a moment of sublime clarity. And now she felt like she was veiled in heavy fabric, closing in her vision, muffling her voice, stifling her breathing. Maybe it was better that her father didn't know of it. Her moment was brief and had now passed. She let out an inaudible sigh and hung her head. Hanabi's quiet snort of contempt was all the more noticeable. Perhaps you did not know of that, Hayashi allowed. The constriction in her chest loosened a little and she dared look up again. But it is important that you and Hanabi be made aware of the differences between the basic Jyuken techniques you use, and the truly advanced moves used by those who mastered more of our clan's style. Niji will assist me in demonstrating some of these techniques for you. His eyes hardened. We will take all night if it is necessary. Ayano, Ota-san, Hinata said quickly, tightening her fingers on the hem of her jacket to keep them from shaking, I have been instructed to prepare tonight for a mission of at least a week's duration. The dojo was deadly quiet, and in the stillness, Hinata thought she might have sensed Niji's left eyebrow move a millimeter upward. Her father's voice was as hard as a kunao and would brook no compromise. Then you had better learn quickly, he said in an emotionless voice, that to Hinata's practiced ear carried the overtones of a snarl. Oh. Abarame Shino returned home to find his father and mother waiting for him. As it was a little early for his father to be home, he regarded them with a raised eyebrow. Mother, father, he greeted them with a deferential nod. Abarame Shivi regarded his son with a neutral expression, his eyes hidden behind equally dark glasses. One of my colleagues, he said quietly, informed me of your actions earlier today. I see, Shino said. The Umbu were quite impressed, his father continued. Your Kakai Bunshin was apparently flawless, and proved capable of deceiving a Jonin. The direction of your allies afterward was precise and timely, and their positioning above the thoracic vertebrae made quick removal impossible. Our relatives are quite impressed with your skill. More importantly, his mother interrupted, smiling broadly, we're proud of you. Misato was not a typical member of the Abarame clan. This made sense, as she was a kunoichi his father had met on a diplomatic mission to the hidden village of Mist. She was, however, as fascinated with insects as the rest of his relatives, and her mantis-style fighting, using twin serrated blades that mimicked the claws of a praying mantis, had evidently intrigued the enigmatic Konoha shinobi. Despite common interests, Misato was different. She actually smiled occasionally, and was far more emotionally demonstrative than the other members of a very reserved and dignified clan. Shino noted that his father neither encouraged nor discouraged these displays of sentiment, but his attention always seemed fixed upon her while they were happening, which was probably enough by itself. From listening to conversations he was supposedly too young to understand, Shino realized that many Abaramis were less than sanguine about having one of their clan's most gifted practitioners marrying someone outside the bloodline. However, Shino's rapid development banished their fears, and led to his father raising a mildly sardonic eyebrow and remarking upon hybrid vigor. But Shino had better things to do than bask in his parents' regard, no matter how pleasant. Unanswered questions nagged at the back of his mind, like splinters embedded in flesh, and only answers would give relief. I appreciate your sentiments, but the role I played in the capture was largely peripheral. While I did drain the subject's chakra reserves, Uzuamki Naruto made the original interception and assault, while Hyuga Hinata performed the actual takedown. Your modesty and sense of teamwork do you credit, his father observed. Shino nodded almost imperceptibly. Perhaps. I have been surprised at Naruto's progress in his training, especially with the expectations I had gleaned from others, both in and out of the academy, he observed coolly. As expected, both of his parents flinched a little at the import of his words, and glanced at each other. If you have first-hand knowledge of something, his father said carefully, it is probably better to rely upon that, instead of second-hand observations. My question is the source of those second-hand observations, Shino replied, bearing down on the cause of his mental distractions of late. His mother grimaced and rolled her eyes. I think I'll see about dinner, she said as she left the room, shaking her head. Shino was left with his father, who seemed unusually agitated, for an Abarame, at least. Finally, he sighed and actually grimaced himself, the rare expression curling his thin mustache. There are restrictions placed around certain pieces of information. As a resident of Konoha, I am required to honor those restrictions. In light of your observations these last few weeks, I will allow that the implications of certain facts may have been misinterpreted or exaggerated. You are picking your words with great care, Shino observed. Correct, his father agreed. I am attempting to avoid committing a capital offense. Shino didn't even bother trying to keep his eyebrows from rising above his glasses. Unlike some hidden villages, there were not a lot of laws in Konoha that carried a death penalty. Outright treason could merit such a punishment, but what would that have to do with his teammate? None of this made sense, but it wasn't surprising that he couldn't puzzle out the meaning, not if he wasn't even allowed to see all the pieces. Given what you know, that I do not, he asked, what would you do in my place? His father seemed to relax a little, though an outsider would have been hard-pressed to notice the difference. I would continue as you have, keeping your eyes open. If you perchance discover something unusual, remember what I said about first-hand knowledge being superior. I will attempt to keep that in mind, Shino promised. Oh. Naruto stayed behind for a moment as his teammates left. Kurane looked at him curiously as he cleared his throat. Ano, Kurane-sensei, I was wondering about our pay for this afternoon. She nodded toward the opened envelope in Naruto's hands. Yes, that is normally done for higher-ranked missions. Given their simplicity and lack of risk, D-rank missions are usually paid out of the Hokage's petty cash. But for higher-ranked missions, they often do not have the funds on hand required to pay the shinobi. So they use vouchers like you have there. It's just a slip of paper, stamped with the Hokage's seal, but any bank or money lender in Konoha will redeem it for the amount listed. A simple jutsu bound to the seal will consume it instantly if anyone tries to alter it. Naruto nodded intently as she explained the reasons for the vouchers, but as she finished he sighed and his shoulders seemed to slump. I wonder if old man Ichiraku can. He muttered. At that point, Kurane made the connection and mentally kicked herself. If she'd been thinking ahead, she could have already dealt with this in a manner less embarrassing for the boy. Ah, you still need to set up a bank account, don't you? Naruto nodded, his face flushing a little. Kurane actually found the normally brash genin to be a little more appealing when he was flustered like this. She idly wondered what effect that would have on Hinata, and how she could bring such an event to pass. Perhaps later, in a year or two. She abandoned that train of thought for the issue before her. Well, I need to go deposit my voucher, since the Hokage saw fit to reward me for doing little more than watching you three fight. Come with me and I'll show you how to set up a bank account. Naruto nodded gratefully, and Kurane congratulated herself for finding a way to help him that didn't seem like a large imposition on her part. As they left the Hokage's tower and made their way through the rising dinner-time foot traffic, Kurane increased their pace to a fast walk. The bank she used typically stayed open until dinner in order to accommodate the tradesmen who were the bulk of their clientele. Their first significant delay occurred outside the bank itself. Two large, brawny men in heavy armor and carrying naginatas were on duty at the entrance. Their size and equipment were intended more to deter casual thieves than real shinobi, but their blade polearms were blocking the entrance. You are still open, she observed coolly, I can see customers inside. You may enter, the one on the left said gruffly, but not him. Naruto flinched a little, seemingly in spite of himself, and Kurane felt even more ashamed of her village. But now was not the time for softer emotions. You tread a dangerous path, she hissed. This boy was just rewarded by the Hokage for intercepting an enemy jonin that had outrun the Umbu. The spy is now back at the tower, entertaining Ibiki. She used the interrogation specialist's name quite deliberately, and was gratified to see the grown men shudder at her words, even as Naruto scratched his head. Be that as it may, the older one on the right said slowly, we have specific orders regarding the boy. Kurane frowned. These men could lose their positions if they disobeyed a direct order, but who would issue such a command? Previously, the animosity toward the Jin hierarchy seemed to be more personal and unorganized. Was someone attempting to provoke Naruto into doing something that would discredit him in the eyes of the village, and perhaps cost him the Hokage's protection? I think I understand, she said slowly. Your superiors may be concerned about a prank of some sort. I can assure you that this is a legitimate task, and that he will perform no pranks within this building. You have my word as a Jonin that I will assume full responsibility for his behavior inside. She hoped they would seize upon this pretext to placate their superiors. The two guards glanced at each other for a moment. Then the older one nodded and they each moved their naginata aside, breathing a sigh of relief. Noting that, Kurane realized that she'd been bringing considerable amounts of killer intent to bear on them. Her anger at Naruto's treatment had become stronger, rather than weaker, over time, but she was still mildly surprised at this lapse in control. Even if it had made convincing them to accept her word easier, it was still unprofessional. Naruto was on his best behavior as they entered, looking around curiously. The decor was understated, but a bit nicer than most of the stores he'd likely seen. She guided them toward the counter when the second delay, in the form of the manager, stepped into their path. I am sorry, Madam Uahai, the unctuous middle-aged man said, using a form of address that Kurane did not appreciate, but as it is late in the day, we are not opening new accounts at this time. I understand that there is another bank, not far from here, that remains open. The man's smile was just a little too smug, and Kurane could already guess where this would go. They would get redirected from bank to bank, branch to branch, until they were left with a seedy moneylender who charged usurious rates, or simply gave up in disgust. Very well, she snapped, clear out my account, bring me the funds, in cash, and I will return to the Hokage's tower to inform him that his vouchers are no longer accepted at your bank. The manager paled suddenly. As a moderate workaholic with modest tastes and a house she'd inherited from her parents, Kurane's savings were considerable. In cash, it would be an inconvenient mess, but she didn't really care at this point. Besides, people walking out of a bank with unusually large amounts of coin tended to spawn rumors that there was something wrong, rumors that could become self-fulfilling prophecies if they started a run on the bank. Especially if the other shinobi heard he had refused a voucher. Now the man looked trapped, and Kurane really wanted to know why. I'm sure that will not be necessary, he said quickly. Then we should get started immediately, Kurane replied in a deceptively mild tone. I don't want to keep your subordinates here too long, but we both leave for a mission in the morning. The manager appeared to be thinking for a moment, but then nodded suddenly. As all of my employees are helping customers, I will assist you myself. Kurane was suspicious of his suddenly cooperative mood, but allowed them both to be led to his office. The actual process to set up a basic account was fairly simple. Naruto just needed to sign several legal documents, none of which he bothered to read first. While Kurane supposed she should be touched by his trust in her, she resolved to discuss with him the proper way to analyze a legal document, preferably before signing them. She corrected herself, when he became Hokage, he would need to be very careful in what he signed. As they finished the documents, Naruto reluctantly handed over the pay voucher that had prompted this entire expedition. The manager's eyes widened a little when he saw the sum written by the Hokage's hand. The sandaime had been generous, but he was correct that it was less than he would have expended on a hunter-nin squad if the spy had escaped. Looking at the manager, she decided to grind the kunao into the bone a little more. Taking out her own voucher, she left it on his desk while she plucked a deposit envelope from the stack. Seemingly of their own volition, the man's eyes wandered over to her slip, allowing him to see that it was the same size as Naruto's. Smiling sweetly, Kurane nodded. The Hokage was quite generous, but Naruto and his team did intercept a Jonin who'd stolen scrolls from the Hokage's tower, and was successfully evading an entire Umbu squad. Naruto intercepted him, and his teammates finished him off well before the Umbu arrived. Looking directly into the man's eyes, she gestured at her voucher. All before I could do anything. I got that just for training them. The Hokage was so impressed, he didn't even care that they'd beaten me to the punch. The manager now looked almost nauseous with fear. Kurane was tempted to arrange for a loud, sudden sound, just to see if he would flee in terror. She glanced over at her student. Naruto's prankster spirit appeared to be rubbing off on her in some ways she hadn't anticipated. For his own part, Naruto's face was pink from her words. He scratched at the back of his head and cracked a nervous grin. Ano, Sensei, you say too much. All I did was dash. All you did, Kurenai interjected, was volunteer to make the initial interception. Facing a fresh enemy, that's the most dangerous role. Not only did you stop him, but you also damaged him so he could no longer get away from us or the Umbu. Naruto shrugged. I'm supposed to protect my teammates, right? Kurenai smiled at her student. He'd embraced his role within the team to a greater degree than she'd hoped. Hinata was inevitable, she supposed, all her machinations aside, but he was also seeking to protect Shino as well. You are exactly correct, Uzumaki-san, she replied in a formal tone, making the boy blush again. Turning to their somewhat dumbstruck audience of one, her voice lost some of its warmth. Is there anything else? She asked. The manager shook his head quickly, but Naruto spoke up. Sensei, this puts all of the voucher thing in my account, correct? What if I want to keep some of the money myself? The money in your account belongs to you as well, Kurenai clarified. And you can pull out as much of it as you want at any time. When you deposit a voucher, you can request that a portion of it be given to you as cash. How much should I deposit and how much should I keep? He asked. Kurenai noticed that when he was trying to wrestle with an unfamiliar concept, Naruto tended to tune out everything else. Right now he was totally focused on her, ignoring the manager who'd angered them so much earlier. Kurenai found it a particularly satisfying experience as a teacher, to have such an attentive student hanging on her words. Those fools at the academy, she mused. You should, at a minimum, try to save at least a third of what you make, and try not to touch it except for emergencies. If you can, save more. Kurenai answered, her voice trailing off as she wondered how best to explain what she wanted to say. It's like carrying kunao, she continued after a moment. How many is a Konoha shinobi required to carry? 3 for active duty, Naruto replied automatically, his voice taking on the sing-song tone of a well-memorized fact. Well, Irika would at least make sure he was well grounded in the basics, she mused. And how many do you carry, Naruto? Well. He hesitated, glancing at the manager, a lot more. Kurenai smiled slightly at his caution with an operational secret. Another test passed. And why is that, Naruto? Because you never know when you might need more than 3, he said, shrugging. Then his eyes widened as he made the connection. So money is like kunao, he asked. She nodded. Correct, it's better to have more than you need than not enough. And since we are leaving for a mission tomorrow, you likely will not need much money in your pockets, will you? I would deposit all of that, and then when you return, you will have another voucher waiting for you. I imagine you'll be eager to visit Ichiraku at that point, yes. Naruto nodded eagerly as he filled out the deposit slip and slid his voucher into the stiff paper. When he finished, he looked up expectantly. Very good, Naruto, Kurenai said approvingly. When we return to Konoha, I will show you how to use an account register so you can keep track of your money. For right now, I need to have a few words with the manager about my account. You should probably have a good supper and try to get to sleep early. We'll be getting an early start tomorrow, remember we are meeting at the Hokage Tower at 9. Don't be late. When the genin left the office, Kurenai returned her attention to the manager, who had partially regained his composure. Explain yourself, she snapped. I do not know what you mean, the man stammered, taken off guard by her abrupt change in demeanor. You attempted to refuse service to a Konoha shinobi who has done nothing to you and yours. He was nearly killed this afternoon protecting shopkeepers and merchants from an enemy jonin who was entirely too careless with explosive tags. Now, when he's trying to cash in his reward, given directly to him by the Hokage, you try to turn us away. Rudeness and abuse he is all too familiar with, but this is different, isn't it? You knew if he went to another bank, he'd get the same treatment, didn't you? Kurenai's red eyes bored into the watery brown ones possessed by the manager, and below the edge of his desk, her fingers quickly formed the seals she needed. The genjutsu she cast was a fairly subtle one, designed to get the truth from those who did not wish to reveal it. It didn't force the subject to speak, but it inspired a certain terror of the caster, and a profound fear of being caught in a lie. Its effectiveness was inversely proportional to the subject's strength of will, making it nearly useless on shinobi, and she knew someone like Ibiki would consider it an effeminate substitute for his interrogation skills. On the other hand, if the seals were concealed from view, the subject might not even be aware he'd been placed under a genjutsu. Of course, using it on a Konoha citizen was rather questionable, and something that could have earned her a long explanation with the Konoha military police, before they were decimated. At the least, it would still earn her an interview with the Hokage if it were discovered. On the other hand, she felt that her observations gave her probable cause to expect that there was some sort of organized resistance to Naruto's presence in Konoha. As that was an attempt to subvert the spirit, if not the letter of the Hokage's law concerning the boy, she felt that she could skate on that issue if it came down to it. The manager's words dispelled these concerns in an instant. "I didn't know for sure, but I did suspect," he answered nervously, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else but talking to this furious Kunoichi. There was a gathering of the bankers and money lenders after the last village council meeting. Our representative to the council of elders said that we were to discourage the boy from patronizing our establishments. If he became violent in any way when refused service, we were to call Umbu immediately. "I see," Kurane said, but she really didn't. "And why this sudden change in policy?" "I do not know," the man said, sagging fearfully. "Many people in our guild would prefer not having him in Konoha," he said hesitantly. "But I think this originally came from the council," he added. "Very well," Kurane said, releasing the subtle genjutsu as she stood up. "I would carefully consider whether you wish to involve yourself in this vendetta some elder seems to have against the boy. He's ambitious, he works harder than anyone his age, and he's gained the attention of the Sandaime and several senior shinobi with his actions today. He swears he will be Hokage someday, and damned if I don't think he might realize his dream. That will not bode well for anyone that stood in his path to the tower. I will be showing him how to keep track of his account, and for your sake there had better be no irregularities in his balance, or I will personally destroy you. Have I made myself clear?" The man nodded quickly, so Kurane spun on her heel and stalked out of the office. After dinner, she'd likely be throwing kunao at the old stump behind her house for an hour before she would be able to sleep. That actually wasn't a bad idea, she reflected as she stepped out onto the street. She needed to do some thinking. Something had changed in Konoha, and she needed to understand what it was, how it would affect her charges, and ultimately her own plans. Oh. The manager, his mind still reeling from the after-effects of terror, could only nod dumbly at the Jonin's warning. He breathed a sigh of relief as she left his office. After several minutes regaining his composure, he shakily rose to his feet. Clutching the documents the two had signed like a life preserver, he made his way to the central counting room to make sure both transactions were entered into the books accurately. He would just report that the boy's Jonin hadn't given him any choice in the matter and threatened to report him directly to the Hokage. No one would blame him in that case. And he would also make sure that Uehai Kurane never had cause to speak to him again. Oh. With no evening training scheduled, Naruto decided that a leisurely dinner at Ichiraku's was just what the medic nin ordered. Surprisingly, the old man had heard about the disturbance downtown, and knew his best customer had been involved. Naruto blinked at the idea of villagers talking about him, and not in the hateful manner he was accustomed to. At that point, there was nothing to be done but to give a blow-by-blow account of the battle. To his credit, he dwelled as much on his teammates' exploits as his own. In particular, he was impressed by whatever the heck Hinata had done. He'd rolled out of the wreckage right as the Jonin reached her, so he'd seen clearly what she did, but that didn't help him understand. He'd never seen her use a technique like that before. Even as hyped up and excited as he'd been from the fighting, her hands were still small white blurs to his eyes. And when she was done, the Jonin just dropped to the ground like a puppet with its S. That all for What If Naruto Found Uzuamki Library. If you like the story so far, please show your support by liking the video and subscribing to my channel, and show your support to the author by following the link down in the description. Thanks for listening, and until next time.